So again, hello everyone. Thank you for coming to the Equally Inclusive Volunteer Pool training. My name is Lily and I am Agency Training Coordinator. Today we have a very exciting person here with us today, Crystal Petry, speaking with us. She is a much sought after national speaker on a range of topics from inclusion, diversity, recruitment, retention, volunteer engagement, and social media training. She is also the director of Golden Triangle Retired and Senior Volunteer Programs, and she oversees about 500 volunteers throughout the Orange, Jefferson, and Hardin County. Just a few quick reminders before we begin. There will be a chance for Q&A at the end of the session, but please, during the session, go ahead and type in your questions in the chat box. I'll jot it down and we will discuss it at the end. Lastly, please just keep your microphones muted as a courtesy to everyone that is speaking. Now, without further ado, I'll have Crystal take it over.
Thank you so much, Lily. Now, as I'm getting started, what I want to do, and it's something that I do in my presentations, is I would like for the participants to give me 3 words that start with the letter A, if you can think of some, and I am going to try and incorporate those words into my presentation. And according to Lily, I have 45 minutes to do that, okay?
Oh, so, sorry, Crystal, it looks like some people are having a hard time hearing you, and I also think you're just a little soft. Your voice is just a little soft.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. I turned up my my volume on my computer.
Great.
Okay, perfect. So what I was saying, what I would like for the participants to do is give me 3 words that start with the letter A. Respectable, kind words that start the letter A, and I will try my very best to get those 3 words incorporated into my presentation within the 45 minutes that I am allowed. So just go ahead and put those in the chat, and I hope everyone is able to hear me clearly and loudly. I turned up the volume on my computer, so hopefully we don't have any more issues with that. But first, I would just really like to thank Lily, and I would like to thank the Arizona Food Bank community for allowing me the opportunity to give this presentation. And thank you to everyone who is on right now listening to the presentation. What I want you to take away from this is ways to make your volunteer pool inclusive. I still see some people, Lily, that are saying that they cannot hear me. So what I'm going to do is unplug my earphones and see if people are able to hear me better that way. And I did see, okay, here we go. Let me know if this is better, if you can hear me better without my earphones plugged in. I did see 1A that came up, accountability. Accountability was one that came up. Okay, I'm still seeing some people that that are saying it didn't change. I'll just speak louder, and hopefully that will help out. But again, thank you, Lily. Thank you, Arizona Food Bank community, for allowing me the opportunity to present such an amazing topic, and a topic that is really needed, not just today or tomorrow or yesterday, but continuously. This is something that everyone that has volunteers or that is volunteering needs to be made aware of, and the information needs to be taught. So thank you so much, Lily, for allowing me to teach such relevant information. Slide, please. Now, one of the things that we are really going to discuss is the difference between diversity and inclusion. A lot of times that those 2 words are used as if they are one word, but they are not. They are 2 completely different words. So diversity, the practice or quality of including or involving people from a range of different social and ethnic backgrounds and of different genders, sexual orientations, etc. So I underline those two words, including or involving. So one of the things for diversity is including and involving. You cannot have inclusion without diversity, and you cannot have diversity without inclusion. So, in order for your organizations to be diverse, in order for your volunteer pools, you need to include other people and you need to involve other people in order for your volunteer pool or your volunteer organization to be diverse. Slide. Okay, the next one is inclusion. Let's see here. I'm still looking for some A's. Hold on. I see accountability. Wow. I see action. We'll use action, and we will use awe-inspiring. I love it. Awe-inspiring. So I have 45 minutes to incorporate these 3 A letter words. Now, inclusion, the practice or policy of providing equal access to opportunities and resources for people who might otherwise be excluded or marginalized. Members of minority groups, African Americans, Hispanic, Asian, and those who have physical or mental disabilities. Again, inclusion, as you can see in the definitions, these words are completely different, but a lot of times they are used interchangeably as if they are the exact same, and they are absolutely not the exact same. So I underline practice or policy. So what here, inclusion, you have to put this into practice. And I'm sure we all know what that word means. That means doing something over and over and over again. Policy. Write this down in your bylaws. Write this down in your rules. Write this down in your laws that you will reach out to give people opportunities that might not receive these opportunities. So you want to give people the opportunity to volunteer with your organization that might not otherwise have that opportunity to volunteer in your organization, or they might not otherwise even know that they have the option to volunteer in your organization. So inclusion basically is action. So that's my first A word. Inclusion is putting action behind your words. So you want to be more inclusive. You want to be more diverse with your volunteer pool within your organization. You put action behind that. Don't just say, this is what I want. Actually go out and do that and practice it over and over and over again. Slide. So this is a very kind of layman's man breakdown for diversity versus inclusion. And I heard a very smart African American woman say this. Her name is Kamara. I'm not going to give her a last name, but her first name is Kamara. And this is how she broke down diversity versus inclusion. And I thought it was awe-inspiring the way she broke this down, and it really was awe-inspiring for me. And I was like, that's an excellent way to describe and define diversity and inclusion. So diversity is being asked to the party. Inclusion is being asked to the dance. Inclusion isn't just inviting people, but actually going out to bring them into the party. So just real quick, I want to go over this. I'm sure everyone on this call at some point in time has went to a party or went to a dance or went to a gathering, whether it was for work or friends or family or whatever that was. We've all went out and went to a party or dance or some kind of event or a wedding or some kind of function. So diversity is someone asking you, Crystal, do you want to go to this party? Diversity is someone saying, Lily, do you want to go to this wedding with me? That is diversity. Inclusion isn't just saying, Crystal, do you want to go to the party? But it's when I get to the party, asking me, do I want to dance at the party? Would I like something to drink at the party? Would I like something to eat at the party? Introducing me to other people at the party. So diversity is being asked to go to the party. Inclusion is actually when I get there, making me feel included, making me feel like I belong, making me feel like my voice is being heard and that I'm respected and I'm wanted at this party. So that's the kind of layman's man of diversity versus inclusion. Instead of like the dictionary.com definition, this is another way, but it was so awe-inspiring for me when I heard her break it down like this, and it's absolutely true. And I'm sure that everyone on here should be able to relate to that. You know, going to a party, being invited to a party, being invited to prom. I know it's prom season within the high schools, being invited to prom, and not only being invited to prom, but being asked to dance, you know, being asked to take pictures and things like that. So making me feel included, not just saying come, but when I get there, making me feel included when I'm there instead of just leaving me on the wall or in the corner or something. So in order to have inclusion, you have to have diversity. In order to have diversity, you have to have inclusion. And you'll see both of those words. I'll mention them and I'll talk about them a great deal throughout this presentation. So I wanted to start the presentation with the definition of those two words. So as we go along in the presentation, you will know exactly what I'm talking about and be able to at least reference to the party or the dance analogy. Slide, please. Okay, so why are Caucasian volunteers so massive? And that's not to say that there's anything wrong with that. We need and we want volunteers in Arizona, in Texas, around the US because the need for volunteers is so great and it's growing every single day. But we want not just Caucasian volunteers, we want all volunteers. We want everyone to be included in the volunteer pool. So why are the Caucasian volunteers so massive? Is it because minorities do not volunteer? And that's a very good question because many people has asked that question of me. Do minorities volunteer? Do Hispanic, Asian American, African Americans, do they volunteer? So I'm going to answer that question for you. Is it because the Caucasian race values volunteering more than the minority ethnicity? According to a 2015 Bureau of Labor Statistics report, volunteering in the United States, it states that among the major ethnicity groups, the Caucasians continue to volunteer at a higher rate. While the numbers for minorities who volunteer are significantly lower, it still answers the question, yes, minorities do volunteer. So, to answer your question, do minorities volunteer? Yes, they do. The second question, do the Caucasian race value volunteering more than any other race? I'm going to answer that question on the next slide, please. So here's the breakdown, and this is from 2015. So, of course, these numbers will be updated as soon as the census, well, bits and pieces of the census are released, but as soon as the full thing is released, these numbers, of course, will be updated. So, according to the census, the Bureau of Labor Statistics report, African Americans volunteered at a little bit over 19%, Asians volunteered a little bit over 17%, Hispanics volunteered a little bit over 15%, and of course, Caucasians volunteered a little bit over 26%. So again, it does answer the question that yes, minorities volunteer, but these numbers are a little bit skewed, and I'm going to explain that to you. These numbers are volunteers who volunteer in an organized volunteer organization. So, for example, my organization, Retired and Senior Volunteer Program, every 6 months, we have to turn in how many African Americans are volunteering, how many Hispanics are volunteering, how many Caucasians are volunteering. So that's how these numbers are tabulated. For United Way, I saw someone from the United Way log in. You turn in to some kind of representative, either state or federal. For me, it's federal. They're wanting to know who is volunteering, how many people are volunteering, how many hours are being volunteered. But it does not take into account the African Americans or Hispanics who are volunteering in their communities, who are volunteering in their neighborhood. So those people are not being counted, if you will, but they are volunteering in their schools. They are volunteering in their churches. They are volunteering in their communities and in their neighborhoods. They're helping to pick up the trash in the parks. They're part of neighborhood watches. So they are volunteering. They're just not being counted on perhaps the federal level or the state level because they're not part of an organized volunteer organization. Slide, please. So this is my ideology or assumption when it comes to volunteering. My ideology or assumption is that the lack of inclusiveness, that's that word again, within volunteers is not viewed as improper, immoral, or wrong. So basically what I'm saying here on the first part is whenever you see an organization and their volunteers are all Caucasian, or the volunteers are all African American, nothing is wrong with that. As a society, we don't see anything wrong with that. What we see are volunteers volunteering. What we see are people giving of their time. And that's exactly one of the things that we should see. But if we see an organization that's all African American, that should be viewed as improper, immoral, or wrong because that is not the society, that's not the community that we live in. The vast majority of Americans, therefore, it is fixed, inflexible, and unquestioned. Meaning, when I see an organization that has all Hispanic volunteers or an organization that has all African American volunteers, I don't see anything wrong with that. So there is not a fix. If I don't see something wrong with that, then I don't feel like it needs to be fixed. I don't question it. I just go along with it. But because of presentations like this one, because of the opportunity given to me by Lily and the Arizona Food Bank community, from now on, when we see a volunteer organization or we see 40 or 50 people volunteering somewhere and it's all one race, something in the back of our head should cause us to start questioning that and looking at that like, that is not the community that we live in. That's not the neighborhood that we live in. And it's definitely not the United States of America that we live in. As I worked on this project, it occurred to me that the first objective must be to get the vast majority of Americans to see that there is a clear problem when not just volunteers, but any group of people is primarily one ethnicity. Then once that is identified, we can work on a strategic change to fix that. But first, we have to realize that this is a problem. This is wrong when all one race or the majority of one race and maybe a few African Americans or a few Hispanics or a few Caucasians are volunteering in one organization. Slide, please. So this is my breakdown from 2014, and these are my beautiful, wonderful volunteers that I love with everything in me. So this is my breakdown. Hispanic or Latino, in 2014, I had 6 members. Non-Hispanic, non-Latino, 508 volunteers. 0 American Indian, 0 Alaskan Native, 99 Black or African American, 2 Hawaiian, and 404 Caucasian volunteers. So there were several directors before me that was director of Golden Triangle RSVP. And to my knowledge, none of them, when they looked at this breakdown, saw anything wrong with these numbers. But hopefully, after explaining that when you have the majority of one ethnicity, that there is something wrong. So when I saw this breakdown, thank you so much, Ashley, for the wow, because it is a wow factor. It really is awe-inspiring when the majority of one ethnicity is volunteering and you have two of another ethnicity or zero of another ethnicity. Now, I love every last one of my volunteers, and I am so appreciative of the time that they give RSVP, the hours, the knowledge, the wisdom that they impart to the community which we serve. But when you see 404 Caucasians and 2 Hawaiian volunteers, something in you should say, that's wrong. That is not right. So when I looked at these numbers, it spurred me to say, you know what, I need to be accountable for this. I need to be accountable for these numbers. I need to be accountable to my volunteers, and I need to make my volunteer pool more inclusive. Slide, please. Now, the things that I want you to learn and take away from this presentation, these 3 things are very, very important to me. So number 1, which we've already discussed, the difference of diversity versus inclusion. So again, diversity is being asked to the dance, being asked to the prom. Inclusion is asking me to dance once I get there, asking me, do I want something to drink once I get there? So including me in the party, including me in the dance. In order to have inclusion, you have to have diversity. In order to have diversity, you have to have inclusion. Those are 2 completely separate words, 2 completely separate words, 2 completely separate meanings, and you need both of them to have a true inclusive volunteer pool. Number 2, the thing that I want you to take away from this presentation is I want you to look at your volunteer pool demographics the exact same way that I did. And if you're able to put the numbers down, decide, look at the numbers. How many African Americans do you have in your volunteer pool? How many Hispanic volunteers do you have? How many Asian volunteers do you have? How many Caucasian volunteers do you have? Look at your numbers. What do you see? Who do you see? And I would actually like to add on to that, who don't you see when you look at those numbers? And number 3, how to purposely recruit for an equally inclusive volunteer pool. So I'm going to give you some tangible ways to go out into your community and start recruiting to make your volunteer pool more inclusive. Okay, so slide, please. And the information that I'm going to give you, the tangible ways, these are things that I started doing back in 2014 when I looked at those numbers. And these are things that I still do to this day. So I know for a fact that they work because they worked for me. So on to this slide. The assumption can be made that people are unaware of the social norm to target a certain group of people to volunteer. But the assumption can also be made that some people fight to preserve past and current social norms. So the first part of this quote, the assumption can be made that people are unaware of the social norm to target a certain group of people to volunteer. So I will use myself for an example. It is very easy for me as an African American female to go out and target other African American females to volunteer for me, right? Because we kind of look alike. We probably are part of the same social groups. We are probably a part of the same civic groups. Maybe we live in the same communities, go to the same churches, whatever that is, okay? Or an African American male, same thing. A Hispanic male, same thing. So, as a Hispanic male, it's going to be easy for you to go out and recruit people who are Hispanic males. Caucasian females, same thing. It is going to be very easy for you to go out and recruit other Caucasian females to volunteer with you. Second part of that quote, but the assumption can also be made that some people fight to preserve past and current social norms. And basically, what Newman is saying here is yes, I see my volunteer pool has 404 Caucasian volunteers, and I want to keep it that way. I don't want to change it. I want to leave it exactly as it is. And as I've talked about throughout this presentation, the first part of this presentation, something in you should say, no, that is not right. That is wrong and it needs to be fixed. If your volunteer pool is 404 Caucasians and 2 Hawaiian natives, or 99 African Americans, something within you should say, that is not right. And that should spur you to accountability and say, I want to change this. And that's where the inclusion comes into play. Not only do you say to yourself or maybe to others that I want to change this, but you actually go out and change it and start working and put an action behind that to actually change that. Slide, please. Okay, so this slide is called the assumption of sewing. This is Grandma Josephine, who everyone calls her Grandma Josephine. This is my husband's grandmother, okay? So we had an event at her house. This was, of course, before the pandemic. There were a lot of people over. This was maybe 3 or 4 years ago. I want to say it was her birthday. Now, Grandma Josephine currently is 85 years old, and she loves taking pictures. And since I have married my husband, I have become her official photographer. So every time she sees me, she says, Crystal, take my picture. Crystal, take my picture. And I am more than happy to take the picture of Grandma Josephine. And as you can see, Grandma Josephine loves to dress up. So it was Grandma Josephine's birthday, as I stated, about 3 or 4 years ago, well before the pandemic. It was on a Sunday. I remember it was on a Sunday because I put on this beautiful long white skirt. And as I was putting on the skirt, getting ready to go to church, I saw that it was a small tear in the skirt. It was small, and I said, you know what? No one is going to notice this small tear. So I'm just going to put on the skirt and I'm going to go to church and I'm going to go to Grandma Josephine's birthday party after service, and then I'll change when I get home. So just as I predicted, no one at church noticed this tear. At the birthday party, no one noticed the tear. As the birthday party is leaving, Grandma Josephine says, Crystal, you have a tear in your skirt. I was like, Grandma, how did you see that tear? It's so small. So Grandma Josephine said, Crystal, when you go home, you need to sew up that tear. That skirt is really pretty. Just sew that tear up and you'll be just fine. So I'm going to ask a question and I would like for you guys to answer in the chat. I'm just going to give you a few seconds on this. Can any one of you tell me what Grandma Josephine did for me when she told me, go home and sew up your skirt? What do you think Grandma Grandma Josephine did for me by telling me to go home and sew up that skirt. After I was emphatic, like, Grandma, I cannot believe you even saw this skirt. Now, again, Grandma Josephine is 85 right now. So she was probably 81 or 82 at the time of this party. So let me see if anyone can guess what Grandma Josephine did for me when she told me to go home and sew up that skirt. Anyone? Oh, somebody guessed it. Someone got it. Ashley. Yes, Ashley. Grandma Josephine assumed I could sew. She assumed I can sew. So I said, Grandma, I do not know how to sew. And at that time, I did not know how to sew. And Grandma Josephine, you know what her reaction was? She was shocked. She said, You don't know how to sew, Crystal? I said, No, ma'am, I do not know how to sew. Now, of course, Grandma Josephine and myself are from two completely different generations. So, Grandma Josephine's generation, I'm sure everyone needed to know how to sew and everyone knew how to sew. My generation, I'm not speaking for everyone in my generation, but the few people that I know, none of us know how to sew. And it's not a big deal that we don't know how to sew. So, Grandma Josephine assumed that I could sew. So, what I went home and did was I looked up on YouTube how to sew a tear. And I taught myself how to sew a tear because Grandma Josephine assumed that I could sew. So, the point of this story is sometimes we assume that people don't want to volunteer. So because we assume they don't want to volunteer, we don't even ask. We don't ask them to volunteer. Because we assume that African Americans don't volunteer, Hispanics don't volunteer, we don't even ask them to volunteer. We just pass them by and go to the next person that we assume will volunteer. Now, if this is done consciously or unconsciously, either way, we need to be accountable for those thoughts. And when we assume that someone volunteers or we assume that someone does not volunteer, either way, we are correct. So because Grandma Josephine assumed that I could sew, I went home and taught myself how to sew. Now, no, I cannot sew a dress or a pantsuit, but I can sew a tear in a skirt. I can sew a tear in a shirt. I can even sew a tear in a pillow because Grandma Josephine assumed that I could sew. So from this day forward, whenever you are going out in your communities and your neighborhoods, I want you to look at every person the way Grandma Josephine looked at me and say, that person can volunteer. That person can volunteer at the United Way. That person can volunteer with the Arizona Food Bank community. That person can volunteer. Slide, please. Now, this is again back in 2014. This was a look at my volunteer pool. Majority all women, one or two males, and just a few minorities that volunteered within my organization. But again, they are all volunteering. They're all doing their part, and I love them all very much. But this was not enough for me to just have the majority of one ethnicity volunteering within RSVP. And if this is how your volunteer pool looks, then it should not be enough for you either. Slide, please. With a targeted approach using a multimedia platform, having an equally inclusive volunteer pool can be easily fixed. The approach that I am recommending is not a quick fix approach. And I am really, really going to stress that. The information that I'm giving you, the tangible ways that I'm going to give you to recruit, it is not a quick fix. It is something that you're going to have to do day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. But with time, effort, and a small or large amount of money, depending on your budget, your volunteer pool, whether nonprofit or for profit, will add to your community and help expand services. Slide, please. Now, these are just a few of the tangible ways that you can go out and recruit. And again, I know Lily is going to email out this PowerPoint. She's going to email out my PowerPoint. She's also recording that. So if you cannot write down that quickly, remember it's going to get to you via email. So number one, go to the neighborhoods of African Americans, Hispanics, Asians, and other minorities in your area. You absolutely have to make yourself seen. You have to make yourself heard, and you have to be accountable to other ethnicities in your community. So go to, when they're having meetings, go to those meetings. Go to the neighborhood meetings. If they're having an event, go to those events. If you don't know maybe where these neighborhoods are, or if you don't know what events are going on, make Google and social media your best friend. Because if there's an event going on, then it's going to be on social media somewhere. It's going to be on Facebook somewhere, YouTube somewhere, Instagram somewhere, Twitter somewhere, Google especially. It is going to be on there because they want to get that information out. Go to these neighborhoods. Now, I will tell you, when I started doing this and I was going to the Hispanic neighborhoods, the Asian communities, it took me, if you want me to put a time on that, it took me about a year before I before let me see how I can phrase this, before they made me feel included in their neighborhood. So the first time I went, they didn't really, talk. They just spoke and they were cordial and then they kept going. The second time I went, it was the same thing. The next month I went, it was the same thing. But after about a year, they started continuously seeing me, knowing my name, knowing where I worked, knowing, that I'm looking for volunteers. So even as adults, there's still a sense of the stranger danger, that we learn about as children. So the first time you go, the second time you go, do not give up. Keep going to the events. Keep making yourself seen. Keep making yourself heard. Number two, go to the schools, which is kind of in alignment with number one. Go to the schools. The schools are always having events, in African American neighborhoods or Hispanic neighborhoods or Caucasian neighborhoods. The schools are always having events. They're always looking for volunteers in PTA or looking for volunteers in different events that they're having and putting on. Go to the schools. Make yourself be included. Let them know that you want to help. Let them know that you want to participate. And this way, African Americans will start seeing you. Oh, I saw you at the school event. Hispanic Americans will start seeing you. Oh, I saw you in PTA. They will start seeing you. They will start knowing who you are. And they will start trusting you. And that's what we want. We want them to start trusting us. Number three, public service announcements played on different radio stations. So across the United States, the radio stations have to play PSAs, or public service announcements, from nonprofits. They cannot charge you. It's absolutely free. It's in their contract to play PSAs from nonprofits. What you have to do, go to your local radio station or even call them. Ask for the program director or the program manager. When you speak to that person, male or female, ask them about getting a PSA played on their radio station. Now, with a PSA, you will have to write your PSA yourself. They're going to give you the time. They'll say, okay, 30 seconds or 20 seconds or 15 seconds. They're going to give you the time. You write your PSA and then you go in and record your PSA. Now, because you're not paying for this PSA, it can run at any time. That means it can run at 9 a.m., 12 p.m., it can run at 1 in the morning, it can run at 2:30 in the morning, it can run at any time. But as we all know, when it comes to the radio, someone is always listening. Now, when you do your PSA, make sure you put in an ask. So the ask is telling them what you want them to do. Call me at whatever your phone number is. Like us on Facebook. Volunteer with us. Email me at. So tell them what you want them to do. Put an ask in your PSA. Number 4, get an article written in a Hispanic newspaper or magazine. They are always looking for articles in their magazines. And what they will do is even take it a step further. You can write the article and then they will translate it into Spanish or they will translate it into Vietnamese or whatever that language is so that their readers can read it and understand what it is that you are doing with your volunteer. Now, I will tell you, by the time I got to number 4, the editors and the producers of these newspapers and magazines had already heard my name and already knew who I was and what I did because of I did 1, 2, and 3. They had already knew about me and heard about me because I made myself visible. I made myself known. I put in the time. I put in the effort. And again, it took over a year before these other communities trusted me, before they felt strongly about me, before, again, they started asking me to dance, before they started including me. It took me about a year. So it's going to take some time for African Americans, Hispanics, Asians, Caucasians are trusting of you, but do not give up. Keep going, keep making yourself seen. And number 5, use social media. Social media is free, absolutely free. And with social media, your reach is greater. So you will reach and target more people than you could just maybe you by yourself or you and a few other people. So use social media, put pictures on social media, put videos on social media. So for me, what I started doing on social media, since I have majority Caucasian volunteers, the few African Americans that I had, the few Hawaiian natives that I had, I would take pictures and videos of them actually volunteering. And I would put that on social media. And that way, people, other African Americans could see, oh, I see other African Americans volunteering. I see other Hawaiian natives volunteering, and that will pique your interest. And you can do that in a way that's not disrespectful to the race and it's not disrespectful to the culture. You want them to be seen volunteering. You want them to be seen handing out food. You want them to be seen reading books to children. You want them to be seen in their element, volunteering, doing things that they absolutely love and that they absolutely adore. And that way, other people that look like an African American male, a Caucasian female, a Hispanic male will want to volunteer or at the least want more information about what is that person doing and who are they doing it with. So again, these are just a few of the things that I use. Every last one of them works. because it's what I have done and it has been successful within my organization. Slide, please. Now, look at the pictures, look at the inclusion, look at the diversity of my volunteers. Again, having an equally inclusive volunteer pool is not a checkbox system. I was on the phone with someone, kind of giving them some information about how to make their volunteer pool more inclusive. And she was on the phone with me saying, check, I have one African American male. Check, I have one Hispanic female. So this is not a checkbox system. You want your volunteer organization to be reflective of the community you serve. So you want males volunteering, you want females volunteering, you want Hispanic, Asian, African American, Caucasian. You want everyone that you can get to volunteer. The reason you want all of these people to volunteer because the need is so great in our communities. So this is not check, I have a Caucasian female, check, I have an African American female system. This is going out into these communities, building trust, building rapport, and getting those people to trust you and come and volunteer in your organization. When the word priority is used in this context, the underlying meaning to that word is that it is an ongoing priority, meaning that recruiting people of color and men must be a never-ending priority for your organization. As I stated before, it took me about a year before I felt included in other communities. But I kept going, I kept calling, I kept emailing because it was a priority for me and my organization, and it still is 5 years later, 6 years later, a priority for me and my organization. So it has to be ongoing for you. It has to be ongoing for your organization. Slide, please. So, Mary Dole with Volunteer Weekly says, building a strong, diverse, that's that word again, volunteer program that mirrors your community will mean your organization is much better placed to reach people who need or would value your services. As our communities become more diverse, we need to realize that there are benefits to reflecting these changes and disadvantages to not. Dole says you can't serve your clients in the most effective manner if you don't represent them. Slide, please. So after a year, I recruited 16 male volunteers, which was huge for me because about 95% of my volunteers were female. So I wanted to be more inclusive and get men volunteering. 6 African Americans and 1 Hispanic. And that was 1 year of doing all 5 of the things that I just talked about. And of course, these numbers have increased over the years, but after 1 year, I mean, that is awesome. That was awesome. I was very excited. Even my staff was very excited about these numbers. Slide, please. So here we go with this. And I want to tell you this, but there's a happy end to it. Whatever you do won't be enough. Try anyway. And this is from President Barack Obama. So if you look at my numbers in 2014, I had 404 Caucasian volunteers. So in 1 year, 16 male volunteers, 16 African American volunteers does not seem like a drop in the bucket, right? It doesn't seem like it's enough, but you try anyway. You make it a priority anyway. You keep going to the schools. You keep going to the events. You keep going to the communities. You keep getting your letters and your articles written in Hispanic magazines. You keep doing it, and eventually those numbers will add up one by one by one. And it may seem like it's not enough, but you keep trying, you keep doing it, and you keep making it a priority for you and for your organization. Slide, please. Now, I'm not going to read this whole thing. And again, this PowerPoint is going to be emailed out to you. But it has been 391 years since the word volunteer was introduced. And during that time, no one was allowed to volunteer except for Caucasians. So the reason it has to be a priority is because for 391 years, no one else was allowed to volunteer except for Caucasians. So it's going to take us just as long, if not longer, to make people feel included, to make them feel wanted when it comes to volunteering. So, one by one, we all together can make other ethnicities, minorities, underserved communities, disabled Americans, Americans that deal with mental health, make them feel included and make them feel wanted when it comes to volunteering. And it is all our responsibility, and we all are accountable to make that happen. Slide, please. To be known, to be heard, to have one's unique identity recognized and seen as worthy. It is a universal human desire. And again, that's by President Barack Obama in his book, A Promised Land. Everyone wants to be known, everyone wants to be heard, everyone wants to be recognized and seen as worthy. And when you go up to someone and assume that they want to volunteer, you will let them know that I see you, that I want you, that you are worthy to me and to my organization. But you have to go to that person, you have to go to that community and invite them to the party, invite them to the dance, make them feel worthy, let them know that I see you and I recognize you. It's something that every person on the planet wants and desires. Slide, please. And that is the end of my presentation. Again, I would love to continue to work with you guys. This is my email address. Email me questions or anything else, and I promise I will get back to you. Lily, do we have any questions in the chats as it is time for our Q&A?
Let me see. I think no one so far has any questions, but I would like to invite everyone that's on the call to, if you have a question, please unmute yourself and we can go ahead and discuss it now.
And so as we are waiting for some questions to come in and people to unmute themselves or perhaps put their questions in the chat, again, I just want to say it is our responsibility to go into these communities, to go into these neighborhoods, to go into these schools and make ourselves known, make ourselves heard, and let people know that they are valued. Let people know that you want them to be a part of your organization, that you would like for them to volunteer within your organization. And always remember the Grandma Josephine story, the assumption of sewing. She assumed that I can sew, and therefore it inspired me to go and learn. So always assume that people want to volunteer, and they will volunteer for you.
I have a question. So I have visited a few food pantries and they're out in rural areas and a lot of the volunteers are Caucasian. As far as diversity, the town itself might not have a lot of diversity, but let's say I am someone running a food pantry. Most of my volunteers are Caucasian, but there are some African American individuals in my community that I'd like to reach out to. What is a good way to approach them without making them feel uncomfortable, or how can I reach out to that community in my rural area?
I think what you would need to do, well, not think, what you would need to do first, Lily, is number one, the first thing on my list is go to those communities. So go to those communities, introduce yourself, make yourself known, and participate in the events in those communities. And by doing that, you're letting them know that not only am I here with an ask, right, to volunteer with my organization, but I'm also here with my time, my energy, and my effort wanting to help in your organizations, wanting to help in your communities. But you have to get into those communities, introduce yourself, which can be, scary or make you anxious at first, but keep going into those communities, keep introducing yourself, keep shaking hands, keep speaking, and then eventually they will come and start volunteering for you as well.
Thank you. Monique, do you have a question?
I do. Well, it's kind of a comment as well, because the food bank I work at is on the tribe. So the volunteers currently are people who need community service hours. I don't have a very strong volunteer program and just in general. But what I was wondering is, because we're on the reservation, for the participants, they're mostly Native American. They live on the reservation, but I feel like it would be uncomfortable for them to, I guess, go ask outside of the reservation to come help. So I'm just wondering about how the inclusion and diversity, it needs to be purposeful, but what about the comfort of the participants in the food bank?
Okay, so I want to make sure that I'm understanding your question. So, are you asking that the Native Americans, they do not want to, or they don't feel comfortable going to other neighborhoods to ask for volunteers? Or are you saying that other races don't feel comfortable coming into the Native Americans and helping?
No, not really either of those scenarios. It's where the native population on the reservation, they want the volunteers to look like them, and it's already a challenge to get native people in our own community to volunteer,
Mm-hmm.
because the food bank is located on the reservation. But so I feel like it might be easier to go off the reservation because it only a mile away, and get people to come help. But then the predominant demographic outside the reservation is Caucasian. So then we run into another dynamic that's been persistent for a long period of time. So I feel like, because I'm from the community, they are starting to trust me. We're developing a good relationship in the food bank. But with volunteers, I feel like the volunteer pool is extremely small, because I have to rely only on those in my community who don't have a strong volunteer mindset. But I also don't want to go out. But I hear you about diversity, but then I don't want to be persistent in a different situation.
Okay, so you're saying, Monique. Okay, I understand it now. Okay, so volunteering is really going to help the kind of persistent, ongoing issues that have been going on in the Native American community, valid issues that have been going on in the Native American community. And what it's going to do is show them that other ethnicities care about them, other ethnicities want to make sure that they're eating, that they're healthy. It'll show that other ethnicities can be trusted. Because if I am going to volunteer to pass out food or clothing or information, whatever it is, then some part of me cares about the person that I'm helping, right? Some part of me cares that I want to make sure you have clothes to wear. I want to make sure that you have food to eat. And eventually, the more I see you, the more I talk to you, I will start trusting you. I'll start building rapport with you. But that's not going to come overnight, especially in that community. So it's going to have to be a priority, but you don't want to force it, right? You don't want to force that. But volunteering and having other people come into that community of yours will help with some of the issues that are ongoing in your community, because it'll show them that, okay, they actually care about me, they actually want me to eat, they actually want me to have clothes, they actually want me to have this information for the betterment of myself and for my family. And then you will always, I know you said that the volunteer mindset is not that strong in your community, but you will always have at least one or two people who want to volunteer from that community. So have them come on and volunteer, and then they will bring other people. They'll bring their friends, they'll bring their family, but you still have to make sure that your volunteer pool is not just Native Americans. You want it to be more inclusive, because it'll, all that will do is make your community better in the long run. Did I answer your question, Monique?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
And again, if you have other questions or like follow up, please email me and we could talk about it more.
I think Maya wrote something in the chat. She said, Crystal, you mentioned shaking hands, and it made me think about the transition out of COVID. While many of us in the field are already vaccinated, not all volunteers or community members are. So do you have any recommendations for reaching out to the new potential volunteers while we're still in this crazy time of COVID?
That is an excellent question. Am I shaking hands as me still thinking before the pandemic? So one of the ways you can do that again is social media, especially during times like this where, in the middle of a pandemic, coming out of a pandemic, use social media as much as possible. So put your videos on social media, put your pictures on social media, and put your ask on social media. So if you're looking for, volunteers, put that on social media and say, hey, we're looking for volunteers for this event coming up in a week. Or if you want people to like your Facebook page, hey, can we get 10 likes by the end of the week? So use social media as much as possible, especially during this pandemic age. You can also get your articles written in the newspapers and magazines. You can just email that and do that over the phone. And a lot of the times when I was writing articles or things like that for Hispanic magazines or newspapers or anything like that, I would do it over the phone. I would email them my article. We would go back and forth until it was correct. So use social media, get on the phone, talk to as many people as you can, email as many people as you can. There are so many Zoom meetings going on right now that communities are having Zoom meetings. So do get invited to those Zoom meetings, and a lot of them are open invitation, meaning if you're interested in this subject, if you're interested in volunteering, if you're interested in PTA, if you're interested in reading to the kids, register for this Zoom meeting. So a lot of them are open registration at this point in time. That's an excellent question. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Great. So I think our time is about up. If there's any lingering questions, or if maybe you want to talk further about the discussion, Crystal went ahead and put in her email. My email, I'll go ahead and put that down as well, so we can chat more about this, because it is such an important topic. Thank you so much, Crystal, for speaking with us today. I know I learned a lot of information, a lot of really critical information that we as organizations should be looking at and making sure we're following through with. So thank you.
Thank you.